I, 32M, have been married to my wife, Sarah, 29F, for 5 years. We don't have any kids by choice. From the outside, everything probably looked normal. I thought things were okay for the most part, but maybe that's just how blind I was. Sarah's always been, let's say, high maintenance. She loves her conveniences, like Uber for everything, even trips to the grocery store that's barely a mile away. And over the past 6 months or so, she started using the same Uber driver almost every time, this guy named Daniel. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. He was. I didn't think much of it, maybe because I trusted her. Maybe because I didn't want to come off as paranoid or controlling. We were busy with our own lives, jobs, and personal stuff. But in hindsight, there were signs. Little things that I should have caught on to, like how she started spending way more time on her phone and giggling at her texts. Then there were these random late-night drives she started taking, saying she needed to clear her head or run errands. Daniel always happened to be the one driving her. It started to get weirder when she began dressing up to go on these errands. She'd put on makeup and perfume, something she hadn't bothered to do for me in months. I asked her once why she was getting so dressed up just to grab groceries, and she snapped at me. Said I was overthinking things, and she just wanted to feel good about herself. That was the first red flag I really noticed, but I brushed it off. I should have trusted my gut, but I didn't. That's all for now, but there's so much more to this story that I can't even begin to explain here. This is just the beginning. Trust me, it gets worse. Things kept getting stranger after that. Sarah's errands became more frequent. She started disappearing for longer stretches of time, sometimes for hours, claiming she was just out with friends or shopping. The thing is, I couldn't even remember the last time she brought home bags from any of these supposed shopping trips. I tried to ask her about it a couple of times, without sounding like a paranoid husband. But every time I did, she'd turn it into an argument. She'd get defensive, saying things like, "Do I need to report to you every second of my day now?" Or, "I'm not your prisoner, John." It was exhausting, so I stopped asking. And then Daniel, the Uber driver, started coming up more and more in our conversations. "Oh, Daniel and I were talking about this." Or, "Daniel recommended this great restaurant, maybe we should try it." He was her go-to for everything now, apparently. I didn't even know the guy, but he was becoming a weird third wheel in our marriage. There was one night I remember so clearly. Sarah had gone out again, saying she needed some me time, and that she'd be back in a couple of hours. I was up late, just watching TV, not thinking much of it, when her phone buzzed on the coffee table next to me. I'm not the type to go through her messages, at least I never used to be, but something inside me snapped. I picked it up. The text was from Daniel. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow night. Same time?" My heart dropped. But then I did the dumbest thing. I convinced myself it was nothing. I told myself, maybe they just became friends. Maybe I was overreacting. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, especially without talking to her about it first. So I let it go again. When Sarah came home that night, I didn't say a word. But something was already changing inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her to someone else, and I didn't even know it yet. Little did I know, I was right. About a week later, I got a call from my friend Mike. He was in town for a visit and wanted to catch up over drinks. I hadn't seen him in a while, so I figured it would be a good distraction. As we talked, I found myself sharing my frustrations about Sarah. I told him how distant she had become, and how strange it felt to have this Uber driver practically living in our marriage. To my surprise, Mike didn't brush it off. He leaned in closer and said, "Dude, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck." He didn't have to finish the thought. I knew what he was getting at. But part of me still wanted to deny it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could betray me like that. The next day, Sarah left for another one of her errands. I decided to follow her. It felt wrong, but my gut was screaming at me. I hopped in my car and followed her. She drove for a bit, and my heart raced as I followed her to a cafe on the outskirts of town. I parked a little ways down the street, trying to keep a low profile. After about 20 minutes, she walked out with Daniel. I thought my heart would stop. They were laughing together, looking way too comfortable. I felt sick as I watched them. They hugged before getting into his car, her hands lingering on his shoulder. The moment they got in, I couldn't help it. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. I thought I'd need proof, though I didn't want to believe I would ever use it. The entire drive home was a blur of anger, betrayal, and confusion. When Sarah finally returned, she acted like everything was normal. "Hey, babe! You won't believe the new dessert I found!" she exclaimed as she walked in. I forced a smile, but inside I was boiling. I couldn't bring myself to confront her right then, but it was a turning point for me. I could no longer pretend that everything was fine. As the days passed, I became hyper-aware of every little thing. Every late-night text, every phone call where she stepped out of the room. The trust was shattered, and I was done playing the fool. I just needed to catch her in the act. But little did I know, the truth was coming for me faster than I could imagine. A few days passed, and I kept my eye on Sarah. I could feel the tension building, like a storm waiting to break. Each time she left the house, I'd be a bundle of nerves, convinced she was off to meet Daniel. I was desperate for clarity, but I couldn't confront her just yet. I wanted hard evidence. Then came that fateful Saturday. Sarah announced she was going out to run some errands again, this time for a friend's surprise party. I knew I had to act fast. I waited a few minutes after she left, then grabbed my phone and texted Mike. "I need you to help me out. Can you be my eyes and ears for a bit?" He was game. I knew he'd have my back. I told him to stake out the cafe where I'd seen Sarah with Daniel and to text me if he spotted either of them. Just as I was pacing around the house, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. "Just saw Sarah pull in with Daniel. They're at the cafe, looks cozy. I'll keep you posted." My heart dropped. I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the rising anger. I couldn't believe it. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my keys, and headed out. The drive felt like an eternity. My mind raced with questions and thoughts of betrayal. I parked a short distance from the cafe and walked in, trying to remain calm. As I stepped inside, my heart raced. I scanned the room, and there they were, Sarah and Daniel, laughing and leaning in close to each other. My blood boiled as I saw her playfully nudging him, her laughter ringing out like a siren. I could feel my fists clenching as I approached. I'd planned to confront them, but I hesitated for just a second. That second turned out to be all I needed. I watched as Daniel leaned in and kissed her cheek. The sight sent a wave of rage through me. I couldn't stand by any longer. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice cutting through the chatter of the cafe. She froze, turning slowly, her face shifting from surprise to horror. "John!" she exclaimed, eyes wide as she quickly sat back, trying to create distance between herself and Daniel. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my heart pounding. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Daniel looked awkwardly between us, unsure if he should bolt or stick around. "John, wait! It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice rising in that familiar, hysterical pitch. "Oh, really? Because it looks like you've been lying to me this entire time." I shot back, my anger boiling over. "John, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice now a mix of panic and annoyance, like a cornered animal. But I wasn't interested in her excuses. I was done. "Explain? You want to explain your little rendezvous?" I spat back, gesturing to Daniel, who was still sitting there, looking like he was about to burst into flames. "You're in a full-blown affair, and you want to talk?" Sarah stood up, her face twisted in fury. "You're being ridiculous. This is just what? A casual fling? Don't insult my intelligence!" I interrupted, feeling the weight of betrayal crushing down on me. As the tension crackled in the air, I knew this was the moment everything changed. I was done. and the next step would be to file for divorce. I had seen enough. But before I could turn and leave, the unexpected happened. Sarah burst into tears. Sarah's tears came suddenly, and for a moment, I was thrown off guard. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had shared my life with, was crumbling right before my eyes. She covered her face, sobbing, while Daniel looked utterly lost, clearly unsure of what to do. "John, please!" she wailed, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is." I shot back, frustration pouring out of me. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me and running off with your Uber driver." She took a shaky breath, glancing nervously at Daniel, who was still sitting there, frozen. I didn't mean for it to happen this way," she stammered. "We just got close, and it didn't mean anything. You know how you get when you're busy with work, and I just felt so alone." "Alone? Alone enough to sleep with a stranger?" I replied, incredulous. "You couldn't come to me? You had to go and betray me like this?" She shot back with a haughty tone. "You've been so wrapped up in your job. You hardly notice me anymore." That hit me hard. I had been working long hours, but I had never stopped caring for her. "So, cheating is your solution? That's your answer?" I shot back, my voice tinged with disbelief. "John, I wasn't even thinking. It just happened," she exclaimed, her voice rising again, teetering between anger and desperation. "You make me feel trapped. I need excitement. You're boring." "Boring? Really?" I said, my heart pounding. "That's your excuse? You went looking for excitement in someone else's arms?" "I didn't go looking for it," she shouted, her composure cracking. "Daniel just made me feel special again. You've been so distant." I glanced over at Daniel, who seemed to realize he was in way over his head. He finally spoke up, trying to defuse the situation. "Maybe I should just go," he suggested, but Sarah shot him a look that could kill. "No! Stay! I need you!" she cried, her voice a mixture of anger and desperation. At that moment, I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. "You need him? You've clearly made your choice," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "You want to ruin our marriage over a fling? Fine. Go ahead." Sarah opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The moment hung thick in the air, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the cafe on us. I was humiliated, but more importantly, I was furious. This wasn't just about her cheating. It was about how she'd thrown everything we built together out the window without a second thought. I turned to leave, but Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. "Don't go, John! I can fix this. I'll do anything. I swear!" "Fix this?" I echoed, incredulity lacing my tone. "How do you plan to fix betrayal? You've already crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Just give me time," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I'll end things with Daniel. I promise." But I had already made up my mind. "I'm done, Sarah. I'm done with the lies and the betrayal. I'm filing for divorce. You've shown me exactly who you are." With that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind. The weight of the world was crashing down on me, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. I knew this was just the beginning of a long, painful road ahead, but I also knew I was finally taking control of my life again. After I left the cafe, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. I couldn't believe what had just happened. It felt surreal, like I was watching a bad movie unfold. I got into my car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something, but mostly, I just wanted to escape. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring together. Finally, I pulled over in a park, somewhere quiet where I could think. I sat in the car, heart racing, replaying the scene over and over in my head. Sarah's tears, her desperate pleas for me to stay, Daniel's awkwardness, it was all a twisted nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that my entire world had just crumbled. Mike texted me a few minutes later, asking how things went. I could barely type a response. It's over. I'm filing for divorce. The 3 words hung heavy in my mind, and my heart sank at the thought of what lay ahead. I knew I'd have to talk to a lawyer, figure out the next steps, but all I could think about was how Sarah's betrayal felt like a stab to the gut. When I finally got home, the place felt suffocating. I walked in and froze. Everything looked the same, yet it felt so different. I could still see traces of her everywhere, the throw pillows she picked out, the framed photos of us on the walls. It was as if the very essence of our life together was mocking me. I grabbed my phone and called Mike, needing to vent. "You were right, man. I should have seen it coming," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I thought we were happy, but I was just living in a bubble." "I'm so sorry, dude," he said. "You deserve better than this. You know that, right? She's the one who messed up." "Yeah, but it still hurts." "I trusted her," I admitted, running a hand through my hair in frustration. "How could she do this? People do crazy things for the dumbest reasons. It doesn't make it right. Just focus on yourself for now. You've got a lot to sort out." I hung up and paced around the house. It was late, and I knew Sarah would come home eventually. Part of me wanted to confront her again, to see if she'd admit the truth or try to spin more lies. But another part of me just wanted to avoid the inevitable confrontation. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want to feel that familiar anger rise again. Hours passed, and finally, I heard the front door open. I held my breath, knowing she was home. She called out, "John, are you here?" I stayed silent, knowing that if I said anything, I'd explode. She walked into the living room, her footsteps hesitant. I could hear the tremor in her voice. "Please, we need to talk." I turned to face her, my heart heavy. "Talk? About what? How you betrayed me? Or about how you expect me to just forgive and forget? Just listen to me," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I messed up, okay? I know that. But it wasn't all my fault. You haven't been around." "Excuses," I said flatly. "I don't want to hear them. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I'm filing for divorce, Sarah." Her expression shifted from anger to shock, and then to desperation. "You can't be serious. We can work this out. I'll end things with Daniel, I swear." "Really?" I scoffed. "And then what? Pretend like nothing happened? This isn't something you can just work out. You shattered our marriage." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of pity. But it was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. "I can't live without you, John. Please," she cried, stepping closer. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you threw everything away," I replied coldly. "You had your chance, and you blew it." I turned away, feeling the weight of her gaze on my back. I could hear her sobbing softly, but I couldn't muster any sympathy. I was done. I walked out of the room, needing space to breathe, and to mentally prepare myself for the battles ahead. This was just the beginning of a very painful chapter, and I had no idea how deep the scars would run. But I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let her keep dragging me down. It was time to take back control of my life, even if it hurt like hell. The days following that confrontation were a blur of emotions. I felt like I was living in a fog, moving through each day without really being present. I kept replaying the scenes in my head: Sarah's tears, her desperate pleas, and the sting of betrayal that refused to fade. I hadn't just lost my wife, I felt like I was losing part of myself. I focused on getting my life back on track. I scheduled a meeting with a divorce lawyer named Linda, a friend of a friend who specialized in these matters. I remember sitting in her office, feeling like a walking shell of a person as I explained my situation. She listened intently, her expression neutral, taking notes as I spoke. "So, you have no children?" she confirmed, glancing at me over her glasses. "That simplifies things a bit, but it's still a tough road ahead. We'll need to discuss assets and any joint accounts." Have you thought about what you want in this divorce? I hadn't really thought about that yet. I just wanted the whole situation to be over. I just want out, I said. I don't care about the house or anything. I just want to move on. She nodded, a look of understanding on her face. That's valid. But you may want to consider your long-term financial security. It's important to think about these things. As she explained the next steps, I found myself zoning out. The legal jargon was a blur, and I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. I signed the retainer agreement and left her office, feeling even more drained than before. At home, the silence was deafening. I hadn't expected the loneliness to hit me so hard. I turned to my phone, scrolling through social media, but it only deepened my despair. Friends posting pictures of happy moments and vacations made me realize how alone I felt. I wanted to reach out to someone, but who? Mike was supportive, but I didn't want to burden him with my misery. A few days later, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. I found myself in the park where I'd parked the day I confronted Sarah. I sat on a bench, watching people jog by, families laughing, and kids playing. It felt like a world I no longer belonged to. That's when my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Can we talk? I'm sorry for everything. I just want to explain. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I felt anger bubble up inside me. What more was there to explain? I didn't reply. But Sarah didn't stop there. Over the next few days, she sent message after message, each one more desperate than the last. I miss you. I'm so sorry. I'll do better. I can't lose you. Each text was a reminder of the trust she'd shattered, and it felt suffocating. Finally, I decided to respond, but it was with cold resolve. There's nothing to talk about. I'm moving on. I put my phone down, feeling a mix of satisfaction and guilt. I was finally standing up for myself, but part of me felt sorry for her. I didn't want to be cruel, but I also couldn't allow her to manipulate me back into a relationship built on lies. Days turned into weeks, and as I dove into my work and focused on the divorce process, I felt a flicker of hope. I started reconnecting with friends I hadn't seen in a while, even if it was just for a casual drink. It felt good to laugh again, to not be reminded of my crumbling marriage every minute of every day. But Sarah was relentless. One evening, while I was out with Mike, she showed up at the bar. I was caught off guard, and I could feel my stomach drop. She walked straight toward me, her eyes pleading. John, please. Just let me explain, she insisted, desperation dripping from her voice. I shook my head, trying to remain composed. Not here, Sarah. Not now. Why are you doing this? We can fix this, she cried, her voice rising above the music. Fix what? I shot back. You've already made your choice. You chose him. She looked around, clearly aware of how many people were watching us. Can we at least talk somewhere private? I glanced at Mike, who looked equally uncomfortable. I didn't want to drag this out, but part of me felt bad for her. Fine. Let's step outside, I said, my heart racing. As we stepped onto the quiet street, I felt the weight of the moment. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, crossing my arms. I want you back, she exclaimed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'll end things with Daniel. I swear it meant nothing. I was just confused. Confused? I echoed, incredulous. You've had weeks to think about this, Sarah. This isn't some mistake you can undo. You made a choice, and now you have to deal with the consequences. But I love you, John. I've always loved you, she said, her voice cracking. Love isn't enough when trust is broken, I replied, my heart hardening. You destroyed everything we had. As I turned to walk away, I could hear her sobbing behind me, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. But then I remembered why I was walking away. I wasn't just leaving her, I was reclaiming my own life. And that was the only choice I could make. The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. I focused on work and spending time with friends, trying to rebuild my life one piece at a time. But no matter how hard I tried, thoughts of Sarah crept in, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. She continued to text and call, each message laced with apologies and desperate pleas. I'd grown accustomed to ignoring her, but each ignored text felt like another reminder of the life I was leaving behind. It was frustrating, but I was determined to stay strong. I needed to protect myself from her manipulative tendencies. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to spend some time at a local cafe that had quickly become my refuge. I settled in with a book and a steaming cup of coffee, finding solace in the pages as I tried to block out the chaos in my life. Just as I was getting lost in the story, I heard a familiar voice. "John!" I looked up to see Sarah standing there, her eyes red and puffy, hair slightly disheveled. She looked like a ghost of the woman I once knew. My heart sank, and I felt an old instinct to comfort her, but I quickly steeled myself. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice flat. I just wanted to talk." "I miss you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I closed my book, feeling a mix of anger and pity. "I've made it clear that I don't want to talk. Please leave me alone." But she didn't move. Instead, she sat down across from me, her eyes pleading. "I can't just walk away. I know I messed up, but I've been thinking. I realized how much I took for granted." "Really?" "Because it didn't seem that way when you were with Daniel," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "You chose him over our marriage. John, it was a mistake. I thought I wanted something different. I thought I was unhappy with you, but I see now how wrong I was," she insisted, her voice growing more frantic. "Do you even hear yourself? You keep saying you thought and realized, but you don't get to rewrite what happened. You made your choice, and it had real consequences." I shot back, feeling the anger rise. "Please, just give me a chance to explain," she begged, tears welling in her eyes. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "Explain what? That you're suddenly sorry after everything? It doesn't work that way, Sarah. I deserve more than your last-minute regrets. John, I've been going to therapy. I'm working on myself. I know I can be better," she pleaded, her voice trembling. I was taken aback by her mention of therapy. It was a step I never thought she would take, but I still wasn't ready to forgive her. "That's great, but it's too little, too late. You can't just throw a few sessions at this and expect everything to magically fix itself," I replied, crossing my arms tightly. She slumped in her chair, her defenses crumbling. "I know I've messed up, but I don't want to lose you. I can't imagine my life without you." I looked at her, torn between the part of me that wanted to comfort her and the part of me that was fiercely protective of my own heart. "You already lost me, Sarah. You chose someone else. You need to accept that." Just as I was about to stand up and leave, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. "How's it going? Need backup?" I hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'm fine. Just talking." "Talking? Looks more like begging," he texted back, and I could almost hear his voice dripping with sarcasm. I glanced up at Sarah, who looked defeated, her eyes searching mine for any sign of forgiveness. It was clear she was desperate, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of doubt. But then I remembered the pain, the betrayal. I shook my head. "You need to go, Sarah. I can't keep doing this." "I'll do anything," she said, her voice cracking. "Just tell me how to fix this." "Some things can't be fixed," I replied, standing up and tossing a few bills on the table. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." As I walked away, I felt a mixture of relief and heartache. I was finally putting up boundaries, but it didn't feel good. It felt necessary. Later that night, I met Mike for drinks at our usual spot. He noticed my mood immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost, man. What happened?" "Sarah showed up," I said, pouring out the details of our conversation. "She wants to fix things, but I just can't." Mike nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "You're doing the right thing. You deserve better. Don't let her drag you back into her chaos." I knew he was right, but as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of doubt. What if she really was trying to change? What if she actually loved me? But deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't trust her again. The scars were too deep, and I needed to keep moving forward. I had a long road ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope that I could find my way back to happiness. The days turned into weeks, and while I was learning to navigate life without Sarah, the emotional weight never really disappeared. I was proud of how far I'd come, but the constant reminders of her presence, her texts, the memories in our shared home, still haunted me. I felt like I was stuck in a limbo, and I knew I needed to take decisive action. I scheduled another meeting with Linda, my divorce lawyer, to discuss the next steps. I walked into her office, my stomach twisting with anxiety. This was the moment where everything could change. "Hi, John. How are you holding up?" she asked, her expression warm but professional. "I'm managing," I replied, forcing a smile. "But I'm ready to move forward with the divorce. I don't want to drag this out any longer." She nodded, looking pleased. "That's a wise decision. It's better to get closure sooner rather than later. We can start preparing the paperwork, and I can advise you on how to handle the situation with Sarah going forward." As we discussed the details, I felt a sense of clarity settling over me. I was finally taking control of my life. I didn't want to stay in a place filled with echoes of betrayal and regret. I had to cut ties not just with Sarah but with the version of myself that had been willing to tolerate her infidelities. After leaving the meeting, I took a deep breath, the weight lifting slightly. I decided to spend some time in the park, where I could gather my thoughts. The sun was shining, and as I walked along the paths, I spotted a small group of people practicing yoga. A pang of envy hit me as I watched them, so carefree, so grounded in their bodies and minds. Maybe that was what I needed, a way to ground myself. I considered signing up for a class, something to distract myself and refocus my energy. That evening, I returned home to find a text from Sarah. It was one of her usual desperate messages. "Can we talk? I've been working on myself. I'm seeing a therapist and I'm ready to be honest." I stared at the message, my heart racing with irritation. Did she really think I'd just fall for the same tricks again? I took a moment to collect my thoughts and typed back. "I'm done with the talking, Sarah. I'm moving forward with the divorce. I need space." As soon as I hit send, a flood of relief washed over me. This was it. There was no turning back. I was finally drawing a line in the sand. The next few days passed in a blur as I finalized the paperwork and prepared myself for the impending divorce proceedings. I felt strangely empowered, like I was shedding a layer of skin. I was no longer the heartbroken husband clinging to the hope of reconciliation. I was a man reclaiming his life. But then, on a particularly tough evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Mike. "Hey man. You doing okay? I wanted to check in," he said, his tone light but concerned. "I'm hanging in there," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. "Just busy with the divorce stuff. It's exhausting. Want to grab a drink? I think you could use a break," he suggested. I considered it for a moment, realizing that I did need to get out. "Yeah, I could use one. Let's do it." When I arrived at the bar, Mike was already there, a beer waiting for me. "I was thinking we could hit that new place downtown afterward. It's supposed to have great food and a good vibe," he said, his enthusiasm infectious. As the night wore on, I felt the weight of my worries start to lift. I laughed at Mike's jokes, and we reminisced about old times. But as the night progressed, something shifted in my mind. I didn't want to just escape my problems. I wanted to face them head on. "Mike," I said, lowering my voice so only he could hear, "I've made my decision. I'm filing for divorce officially next week." His expression shifted from casual amusement to serious concern. "Are you sure about this? I mean, it's a big step." "I am," I replied firmly. "I can't keep dragging this out. I need to move on. I deserve better than this heartache." He nodded slowly, understanding my resolve. "I get it, man. You have to do what's best for you. But just remember, it's going to get messy. Sarah won't take this lightly. I know. But I can't let her manipulation control me anymore. It's time to stand my ground, I said, feeling a wave of determination wash over me. As we finished our drinks and prepared to leave, I felt lighter, freer, as if I had finally released the shackles of my past. I was ready to confront whatever came next with my head held high. When I finally filed the paperwork the following week, it felt like a weight had been lifted. The moment the documents were signed, I stepped out of the lawyer's office, breathing in the fresh air as if it were the first breath of freedom. But then I remembered the confrontation that awaited me. I would have to face Sarah, her tears and pleas, one last time. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I was done being the victim in this story. I was reclaiming my narrative, and this was just the beginning of my journey toward healing. The day finally arrived for me to confront Sarah about the divorce. I had set a time for us to meet at the park where we had shared so many memories, happy and painful alike. I hoped that a public setting would keep the conversation from spiraling out of control, though I knew Sarah could be unpredictable. As I walked through the park, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. My heart raced with each step, the weight of the moment heavy on my shoulders. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but I knew that once I saw her, all that resolve could crumble. When I arrived at the designated spot, Sarah was already there, sitting on a bench, her gaze lost in the distance. She looked small, fragile even, and for a moment, I felt a twinge of sympathy. But I quickly reminded myself of the reality, the choices she had made, the pain she had caused. "Sarah," I said softly, approaching her. She looked up, and for a moment, her eyes lit with hope. "John, thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been wanting to talk." I nodded, taking a seat beside her, but I kept some distance. "Let's get to the point. I'm filing for divorce. It's happening." Her face fell, and I could see the shock settling in. "What? You can't be serious. I thought we could work things out." "No, Sarah. We've been through this. You made your choice. I can't trust you anymore, and I won't be manipulated into staying in a relationship that has hurt me so deeply," I replied, my voice steady. "Please, just listen to me," she pleaded, her voice rising. "I know I messed up, but I can change. I've been working on myself, really. You have to believe me." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "You say that now, but the damage has been done. I've lost faith in you, in us. I deserve to find someone who won't betray me." Her eyes filled with tears, and she leaned in closer. "But I love you, John. I really do. We can fix this together. Just give me a chance. Love isn't enough when trust is shattered. I can't keep playing this game," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't just about us anymore. I need to think about my future. But what about all the good times we had? The plans we made?" she said, her voice now a desperate whisper. "The good times don't erase the betrayal. I can't keep holding on to the past while you're still living in the present with someone else." I shot back, feeling a wave of anger rise. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. It's time to let go." Her expression shifted, a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "So you're just going to throw everything away? Just like that?" "Sarah, you need to understand. I'm not throwing anything away. You did that when you decided to cheat on me. I'm simply choosing to prioritize my happiness for once," I replied, my heart racing. She let out a sob, the sound cutting through me. "You're being so cruel. I can't lose you. I won't let you go. Then what do you propose? You want me to stay in a loveless, trustless marriage? Is that what you want?" I shot back, feeling frustration boil over. She looked away, her shoulders shaking as she processed my words. The anger in her eyes faded, replaced by defeat. "I just wanted you to believe that I could change," she said softly. "I hope you do change. I really do. But I can't be a part of it anymore," I replied, my voice firm but not unkind. "This is it, Sarah. I'm moving on. For a long moment, we sat in silence, both processing the finality of it all. I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me. I didn't want to hurt her, but I had to prioritize my own well-being. Finally, she stood up, wiping her tears away. "I guess this is it then. You're really going to go through with it?" "Yes," I said, standing up as well. "I hope one day you can forgive yourself and find happiness, but it won't be with me." She nodded, her expression resigned. "I guess I never truly appreciated what I had until it was gone." I watched her walk away, feeling an overwhelming sense of closure. I had faced my fears, confronted my past, and taken the necessary steps to reclaim my life. It was painful, but it felt liberating. In the weeks that followed, I started to rediscover myself. I signed up for yoga classes, which became a source of calm and focus. I spent more time with friends, and slowly but surely, laughter began to fill the spaces Sarah had occupied. I learned to cherish the small victories: a peaceful morning, a good book, a sunset walk through the park. Each moment brought me closer to healing, and the ache in my heart gradually began to fade. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. I signed the papers with a sense of relief, knowing that I had made the right choice. As I walked out of the courthouse, I looked up at the sky, feeling a sense of weightlessness. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. Life was an open road, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I had taken the hardest step, and now it was time to find my own happiness. I could finally breathe again.